This is coming from government and, of course, from the opposition as far as this is concerned. And just looking forward, the president now has actually proffered his end as well of seeking a negotiating table to sit down with Raila Odinga. But, of course, also key issues have to be put on the table, and there has not to be preconditions. This is what we're discussing this morning with Peter Kagwanja, also Dr. Hassan Kanenje, who is the director of the Horn Institute. Peter Kagwanja is a professor and the CEO of Africa Policy Institute. Also, we have with us Hamid Ashi, who is the governance and policy analyst, and also Dr. Moses Onyango, who is the director of public affairs and international affairs at the USAU. We continue pace to that particular. I think you had exhausted it. We come to Dr. Hassan Kanenje.
We were concluding, basically saying that it's a good idea to have our neighbors in East Africa mediating, but the mediation must be very well structured and well coordinated by, let's say, the ministries, the relevant ministries, and also President don't just jet in and start mediating. There are teams that do a lot of background work. That's why when President Ruto is called upon to mediate in Sudan, you give even time to see what issues need to be taken in. So my argument is that there must be more. There is a story that has not come out about President Suluhu's visit.
So there's no clarity.
Yeah, there's no clarity. Two, there has been statements on her end that Kenya is hurting from this kind of crisis. I think there has been in social media has saying that from March this year, there's been an influx of businesses, in Tanzania that they have ever experienced in their history, and the reason is there's no stability in the neighboring country, which is a reference to Kenya, and therefore, what we are saying is that it's still an economic issue. We are told about 50 Kenyan top business people again moving to Tanzania to locate their businesses and all that. Those kind of talks are not very helpful, but Tanzania seems to be at the heart of this in terms of benefiting. I don't know why it would want to
from this sort of instability.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Let's hear from Dr. Moses Onyango.
Yes. Thank you, Diba. When things happen, when they are in the public domain, there's usually a lot of propaganda and misinformation. And it's up to us as thought processors to try to make sense of them. Now, there are two things that arise from this particular phenomenon. The first one is the issue of public diplomacy, and then conflict transformation. And if you look at both, things have gone wrong, basically. When there's a conflict in any country or any society, there are processes that are supposed to be followed. First, you can try conciliation, arbitration, or mediation that we are talking about. But if you look at mediation, which usually comes after conciliation or arbitration, the mediation process that we are dealing with here, there's a problem. The problem arises in terms of how do you mediate and how does a mediator comes in. Now, here we are being told by Honorable Raila Odinga that the president did not invited the president of Tanzania, but then left her hanging. Now, if the president invited a fellow president, how then does the president leave a fellow president hanging? So there's a problem there. And I go to what Professor Kagwanja mentioned, that there's need for a statement from the state to clarify what happened. And that is the area of public diplomacy. How does the state communicate to the public about things that are going on? So far, we have listened to a tweet from the president himself. And the tweet itself is antagonistic in terms of it's. If you read into the tweet, it's like, okay, there's no problem. I'm always open for dialogue, and I'm traveling to the neighboring state, which in news, he actually left that particular president hanging, but now he's in that country and he's tweeting, I'm going here to do a few things, but I'll come back, I'll meet you. So basically, if you look at the two things, conflict resolution, transformation, there's a problem there. And then in terms of public diplomacy, we are also getting it wrong. And that is why you find that the propaganda that is going out there in the public will continue until we start getting it right.
So he's in Tanzania, and the president was here of Tanzania. They didn't meet up.
Yes.
And you find this tweet that is coming from Tanzania. There's a whole of a mix-up that is not really adding up, as you can see from that particular tweet as well. Dr. Hassel Kadenja, what are you reading yourself?
Well, perhaps as they're saying, she was here for some vacation and she was enjoying some of our beautiful beaches, and she may not find in Zanzibar or Dar es Salaam. That's also a possibility. And she may also have been following, Prof said, following the animals, since some of them were expecting why the Serengeti wants to make sure they give birth while going to Kenya.
You remember the herds as well,
yes,
the Kenyan cows and
it
the
is
crossing
important
over from Kajiado. Yes. So you're tracking the wildebeest as well.
Yeah, you have to track them. You have to make sure. These are citizens without passports. So, but they're common citizens. This has been fascinating. But in the last few weeks, we've been failing ourselves as a nation. We've been embarrassing ourselves regionally as well as internationally. And an admission of that fact does not negate its factuality. We have to look ourselves in the mirror and realize we are not in a very good place. Some of us, perhaps because of the nature of what we do, interact a lot with opinion makers and diplomats internationally. They are shocked and embarrassed that we are actually doing what we're doing to ourselves. Yes, Tanzania, that has been a caring country, for a very long time with us, may, of course, see the need to be able to stabilize. They understand the critical role that Kenya plays in the region. There is no replacement right now for Kenya in the region in terms of the role they could potentially play. But when we're busy shooting ourselves in the foot, that does not advance the collective cause. Tanzania cannot be a hegemon in this region. It is a great country, but still, it falls short in many aspects. They cannot be able to have the kind of robust engagement in the region the way Kenya can be able to do. Kenya can draw from so many other tangible as well as intangible resources that it has. And this also speaks even to the kind we were dared this week by Sudanese general to go there, and that we're going to come back in body bags. Okay, a lot of it had to do also with the way the failed and kind of false starts that we had in our own diplomacy in the region, and some of the statements, of course, are being made by some of our officials. Remember, all of us are Kenyans, and so there is collective responsibility. So whether someone is in government, the opposition, when they say something that another country is going to respond to negatively, that's going to affect our foreign policy. It means we have to take ownership. So we've been behaving badly, both regionally or internationally. Now, while the president has gotten a lot of accolades, especially around the African continent and the global south, because of his pan-Africanist, pan-global south kind of approach, and being able to speak truth to power, especially in terms of trying to reform international financial institutions and tools of global governance, we've not been doing very well internally. And even some of our rhetoric is not being matched by our actions regionally. And that is affecting us. Now, to the point when it comes to mediation, much of it has been said by my colleagues, so I don't want to really belabor what needs to be done with regard to mediation. Now, the statement or the tweet diplomacy that our president tweeted from the other side, of course, is encouraging. Those are very good words. But what needs to be done is actually frameworks, and a framework to move towards something that is substantive for us to get out of this morass. One of the things that anytime there is some kind of crisis between major parties is you need mechanisms that is going to leave out noisemakers, as well as those people who are called nut jobs around yourself. And as long as you surround yourself with nut jobs around you who have the interests that are actually not the national interest, for instance of the Republic, you are going to lose. The Kibaki-Tinga discussions, they had to try and keep away some nut jobs for them to make progress. Even the handshake. When you look at the 1978 Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel, they had to leave out some nut jobs, and the same was true with the Oslo Accords in 1993 between Israel and the Palestinians. Literally, Clinton put them in a place and closed them and said, you're going to need to make an agreement. Because the moment you go out there's so much pressure that comes from those associates around you who do not share a common vision. When you are a leader, ultimately it's going to judge you. It's not going to judge people who are around you. It's going to judge you as a person, And I think it's about time, because we've lost a lot economically as a result of this crisis. Mm-hmm. And it's going to have an impact not just today, in years to come. Our own very Kenyan investors who are Kenyans, they are running away from this republic.
Yep.
If you have money, even anyone on this table, you have $100,000 for instance, you're going to think twice before you invest in your own republic. And this is a country that I love so deeply. Mm-hmm. You're going to think long and hard, because you're like, the shilling is falling faster than those people who are throwing stones in Syokimau. Now, how can I be able to trust that kind of thing? A lot of it is also attributed to the kind of...
faster than Hashi?
Yeah, exactly, faster than Hashi. You understand? Faster than Hashi. And so, if
Friends
we
like
recognize that we are actually in a bad place, when you are in a hole, you have to stop digging. Mm-hmm. And that is where we need to start from.
Mm-hmm. All right, there's an issue also that is being raised by Raila Odinga, that our foreign policy has become such an embarrassment as it is, and it's very transactional. Would we broach that particular issue of the foreign policy being an embarrassment, and from what perspective is a foreign policy an embarrassment to the international community?
I think the foreign ministry is dead. It's not even an embarrassment, and it's being led by a person who knows nothing about foreign affairs. I think that we've been killing foreign affairs since Moi took over, and right now the foreign affairs of this country is run by the vice president. The foreign policy of a country is the president's foreign policy, and he gets a foreign minister in which he can talk to about how his vision should be implemented and where people should go and how things should be done. The foreign minister is supposed to be one of the most independent places there is in a country. If you just look at China, they just replaced their foreign minister after 7 months because he was not doing his job, or there's intrigues in the Central Committee. When President Kenyatta of the first was here, we had great foreign ministers. We had the first one, the first foreign minister, I believe, was who later became the vice president. You're going to remind me his name. I don't believe I forgot his name. Yes, Joseph Murumbi. And then there's C.W. Arguings Kodek. And then there was Munyo Wayaki. And these people had independent foreign ministries running. And this was during the time of the liberation movements, the nationalist movement, fighting for all these kinds of issues in Africa. Now the foreign ministry is an appendage of the presidency now. It's not a ministry on its own. And in this government, it's a government of yes men and women, by yes men and women, and for yes men and women. This is why nothing is moving in this government, because everybody is so scared of saying something in cabinet. And Malala is sitting there with a big rungu from Trans-Nzoia. He's not from Trans-Nzoia, he's from Western, is he? So at the Val, it's all topsy-turvy there in cabinet. And a cabinet is supposed to be a place of equals, and there's only the first among equals, where the president is the decision maker. But the debate should be free, clear, and open for everybody there, so that we can get the best policy. And that's how everything is run. But Debal, the pretensions of Kenya Kwanza to create a one-party state in this country, to be authoritarian, to have an autocracy, is not going to work. President Ruto is, as I've said, is going to ruin the economy, be a one-term president, and never bring people together. He's being forced to bring the country together by the opposition. The reason is Dubali doesn't have men and women who tell him no. When I worked for Mr. Odinga, he said something and we told him, no, that's not going to happen. Well, this is nonsense. We're not going to take that policy. And he would sit and listen to everybody, and then the best idea that came up is what people ran with. But the way the country is being run right now is you wouldn't have Mr. Kagwanja in cabinet, because Mr. Kagwanja would put his hand up and say, that's nonsense. And he has the gravitas to say that, and people would also keep quiet. But if we continue in this way, Debal, if we continue in this taxing the poor, saying that we are going to pay for the debt and the deficit, and we should be self-sufficient, nobody runs a government like that. The United States has debt, it has a deficit, Japan has one, all of Europe has one. What we need is proper economic and fiscal policy. Debal, I've always said the economic team here at Harambee House are stockbrokers. They're not thinkers in the economy. And this is why everything is going down the road. And my predictions, Debal, you know, Debal, I'm pretty good at this prediction business, isn't it? I've said so many things that have happened. I put it to you, it is very important that the president, first of all, gets rid of his hawks, as my teacher on the right has said, my learned friend, and my colleague on the left, to get these hawks out so that they can sit and talk to Mr. Odinga, and we can find a way through this morass. Lastly, you know, the great Alexander Dumas Deval, who was an African, real African, from Haiti, one of the greatest writers in Europe, the classical period, said that we could reduce everything to waiting and hoping. And Kenyans have been reduced to waiting and hoping. And we want our government to have hope as a tool of politics. I've said this many times. And not fear as a tool of politics. And if we get hope, and if we get the face of Kenya, and if we end this brutality by the police of our demonstrators, and an inquiry as to who really was destroying things and shooting things in the city, instead of going to Mr. Kenyatta's house to look for guns, he needs to talk to Mr. Odinga and Mr. Kenyatta and settle this country. He is the president. Nobody's taking him out of the job. We're going to do it through an election. President cannot leave office without an election. We cannot overthrow the government. We cannot depose the government unless he runs away. But I don't think Mr. Ruto is going to run away. He's going to stay. We want an election. And when the time of the election comes, the citizens of this country will make a choice. That is why I'm saying the Electoral Commission is the number one thing on the plate, and we ought to fix that right away.
All right. Kagwanja, on the issue of foreign policy being an embarrassment and it's very transactional, do you hold with the view that it's very transactional?
I think our foreign policy from the days of the Cold War has been guided by one principle called pragmatism. We are not one of those powers that can take a hardline position. One, we are just I would not even call ourselves a middle power, slightly below a middle power. If you take Germany, France, and others to be the middle powers. So we are simply there. Second, we are not a mineral economy, so nobody is attracted to us because of how we are going to make them wealthy. We are more of a transactional state because our geopolitical location on the seaboard of the Indian Ocean, also our peace and stability in a region that is normally seen as one of the most turbulent in the world, and where there are interests, as I have mentioned, of minerals in Congo, oil in Sudan. Now people are talking about uranium in Somalia and so on. Being at this, safe place, we provided safe havens to companies, diplomatic missions, and so on. And therefore, pragmatism is our safest ship home. But pragmatism that is tied to our interests. And I think one of the greatest, innovations during the Uhuru Kenyatta period was now pairing up pragmatism with our interests and the choice of who our partners are. I think Ruto has made Kenya more popular than possibly we have been before by virtue of two positions he has taken. He has taken many, but two have basically been salient. One is, of course, the position of the dollar, which speaks to how does Africa trade within itself? How do we do our own trade? within ourselves. He was not talking about us versus the others, but within our own, continent. Can we trade more without having to have either ruble, renminbi, or the dollar? That was the debate, and it's a debate we are going to have. It's not completed, and by the statements he has made, he has become one of the strongest voices in Pan-African, what we could call the Casablanca opinion of Pan-Africanism. By Casablanca, it's the nationalist section of the Pan-Africanism. It is the other conservative, functional part of Pan-Africanism where we partake and enjoy and say we are Africans. But this radical Pan-Africanism, the nationalist Pan-Africanism, is what we are talking about. His position on the World Bank was also key. And the IMF, that they give themselves loans that are underpriced, 3%, 2%, whatever. But when it comes to Africa, they overpriced. That was critical and also bold. The third, of course, is the busing of the African leaders. Basically, talking about sovereignty of African countries and the respect that Africa is commanding on the global stage. So those made him very popular. But the initial tussle with China didn't go down well, particularly the statements that were made by ministers. And as one of the analysts here said, it doesn't look very intelligent to be at loggerheads with your greatest creditor, the greatest source of your market. The market that you have, the greatest source of your development assistance, and the prime destination of your technical trainees, or everybody training in engineering and all, is headed to those sites. So that didn't look very good. And two, you are fighting over a kiosk, not a major industry, not an industrial park. A kiosk next to Kenyatta University is what is basically you're fighting over. It didn't look very intelligent at that. But there seems to have been a good comeback, because the Russian envoys were here, I think, this week, and things seems to be normalizing. At the same time, you're very good friends with Russia. The foreign minister was here, and some other people are making statements at the United Nations Council, almost doing the Brezhnev, removing the shoe and banging the table, saying, we are Africans, this is how we do things. Completely out of tune with our pragmatism. And out of tune with many African countries that were the position they have taken on Ukraine. It's a very sensitive thing. You've heard what Trump said, that if he gets to power, Ukraine war will be over next day. In hours. So what I'm saying is that we still need to stick to our pragmatism, because we are a small nation. We cannot take hardline positions. Two, we need to be guided by our interests. Yes. And I would agree with Hashia that some of the people, within some of these dockets, actually don't understand what our foreign policy interests are. They don't. I say this guidedly, because him and I have been.
So aside from the foreign policy being transactional and pragmatic, what else can a foreign policy be in this country aside from that being transactional? Let's say from Dr. Moses.
Yeah. Thank you, Dibal. I would like to concur with my colleague, Professor Kagwanja, in many things that he has said. But when we speak about foreign policy, we cannot speak about foreign policy devoid of diplomacy. So when one says that Kenya's foreign policy is embarrassing, there's a problem there. One would say that the diplomacy is embarrassing.
The diplomacy is embarrassing.
Yes.
Not the foreign policy.
Not the foreign policy. No. Because what happens is that Kenya's foreign policy hasn't changed, and Kenya has foreign policy pillars. That is peace and security, economic, environment, diaspora relations. They have not changed. Now, what has changed now are those people who are delivering the foreign policy, the diplomats themselves. And the president is number one diplomat of the country. So if there's anything embarrassing, it is the diplomats currently who are embarrassing, but not the foreign policy. I would also want to say that when you look at the international system and how the different powers relate. I would like to agree with Professor Kagwanja that we are a small power, and our foreign policy has always been pragmatic, and that is what it's supposed to be, because the big powers determine the foreign policy behavior of small powers, and what small powers have in their tactical way to deliver their survival is to try to maneuver through that. And I think historically Kenya has always done that. Now, you've asked a question whether our foreign policy has now become more transactional. Of course, when you look at the economic
it's not even me who's asking. Israel who's saying this foreign policy is just very transactional.
Yes. If it is very transactional, it is good to be transactional, because the international system, the way it operates, all states are actually transacting business. Now, what is different, what might be different, is that maybe that transactional foreign policy is not good for the whole country, but pursuing interests of particular actors within the country. So we need to look at it from that particular perspective. But all countries pursue economic policies that are transactional, that are of beneficial to their national interests.
It's interest first.
Yes.
Yes. Right. Dr. Kanenje.
Yes. I do agree, of course, that we've said it before, the foreign policy has remained constant, for in terms of the guiding principles. Now, just speaking, because there's a particular thing that Raila alluded to, and that had to do, I think, with Kenya's position with regard to the conflict in Ukraine,
Yeah, we were coming to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, because I still support our fairly neutral position, as opposed to being decidedly partisan, because it may not serve our national interest.
All right, but your sentiment still on transactional and the pragmatism of the foreign policy?
It has to be, we can only engage insofar as the national interest is concerned, and yes, so transactionalism is something that's going to be at the forefront, but pragmatism is something that should guide us, not emotion, not passion.
You mentioned the fact that the foreign policy has remained steadfast for the longest. I think since we have this installation of a new foreign policy, was it in 2014
Yes.
until now? In light of the global changes that we do have, and now we're talking about the multipolar world that we're coming into. We're talking about the digitization, the world being global and being flat as it is. Don't you think also we need to retweak or maybe just add some elements to this foreign policy as it stands? These 5 pillars, still we have a world which is in a war, and I think also we're in a conference some time back when we talked about even the digital pillar being added to the foreign policy.
Yeah, no, you have the guiding principle, the fundamentals of foreign policy. It's the mechanics of how to advance it that tends to change, reflects the changing dynamics with the international, whether it's regional or global dynamics. And of course, that is what we have to keep adapting, then train our diplomats to be able to effectively advance it. But in terms of what informs, because that it is based on the core national interests of Kenya, that, as identified, and these are our core national interests and it's our core values. And so anything else is going to be subject to these interests. And as long as we stick with that, but then we have a framework of actually advancing it successfully, we're still going to be fine, no matter what happens in the international system.
I'm going to disagree with my colleagues. Well, I think that their view is the conventional view. I suggest to you that this idea of the nation state itself and the political economy of Africa conducting diplomacy, as it were, I think is passé. I think the number one foreign policy we have is to look for this undiscovered country called East Africa. And the totem poles of our sovereignty, the concepts of self, of national interest, and all these concepts from the 20th century, in my view, is not what we should aspire to. I think we should aspire to a common East African foreign policy, a common East African common market, common shared sovereignty, shared parliament, shared defense systems, shared finance, Because Kenya on its own may be someone or as an authority in the region, in matters of the region, regional diplomacy. We are called an anchor state and all these things. But as we move into the 21st century, we have to look at what's happening in the world. There's no such thing as a German foreign policy. There's a European Union foreign policy. There's a North American foreign policy, even though it's an American one that is inspired mostly by the Americans. There's an ASEAN foreign policy. States are building around the world at this historical conjecture the idea of blocks. And that is how foreign policy is being conducted. When we go to a meeting, we don't want to go with and this idea has been adopted by President Ruto by 52 or 54 heads of state to go to Russia, to go and meet Russia or to meet China. It's ridiculous, it's just ridiculous. So what we need is 5 regions. And for us here, if we set the example on keeping our East African home and then having a common front, we will be able to do trade, diplomacy, and all the other things in a way that is more substantive and more helpful to our citizens than Kenya being a nation state in its foreign policy. So my first foreign policy, if I was the foreign minister of this country, would be an East African policy. I think this is very critical for us to see, because I think what we are being hampered with is the tautology and the ideological frameworks of the 20th century, which is anchored in the idea of the nation state. And I think that once you fall into that pit, the vision in which you try to understand policy becomes blurred. And I put it to you, Debal, I think it's very critical. And the evidence is right here on the streets of Ngong Road. Kids from Burundi are selling maize there. Somalis are in Bujumbura doing trade. People are voting with their feet. It is the responsibility of these states to catch up with what the citizens are doing. So, Debal, at the end of the day, I think it is very, very important that we really reconstitute our mental and ideological policy tools to look at this undiscovered country and how we can move I know my friend on the left here is concerned about the issue of self-interest and pragmatism, as it should be, but those issues are not going to be thrown out, because we will be adding other self-interests and other other policies that can give us a thump or oomph when it comes to driving our policy. And I think that if we stay in this rut, in this miasma of thinking from the past, we'll not be able to cross the bridge to the future.
All right, we need to bring this to a close. Let me hear from you, Peter Kagwanja.
I think she is good. Being utopian is not particularly bad.
It's not utopian, actually.
Yeah, but this is what was
a fact on the ground.
Sure, this is what Nkrumah was saying. In Africa must unite. You read the text. Africa must unite, and he was not irrelevant. He was very relevant. Even now we are trying to implement him. But the truth of the matter, this is what Nyerere told him, that birds don't fly until they grow feathers.
But that's who I'm with.
So
I'm with Nyerere with regional.
That's fine. But what happened here? What Kenya is facing is a totally changed world. We are now in a multipolar world. Look at where we are coming from and how we have navigated our way through the past. First, of course, we had the Cold War, which was a bipolar world, Russia and China, and the reverberations of that were clear from the stoning in Kisumu and so on. They were all had to do with those ideological divides of the time. But we navigated our way. Then came the post-Cold War, the unipolar world, and we became very good. We stabilized. I remember I was one of those who were drafting the current foreign policy. And what did we say? We rookist, because things are, and we put it very clearly that the rookist policy is going to be to guide us. And then we also talked about rooking south. Yes. And for the first time, we opened an embassy in Brazil. We opened an embassy in Korea. And we also talked about rerooking the north. And at that juncture, we opened an embassy in Dublin, in the United Kingdom. And the reason is we are interested with technology. and that doubling is more important to us because of the technology we want. We moved to Madrid. Spain has had no colonies in Africa as such. But we need medicine, we need their technology, and we need their tourists, and so on, all guided by national interest. So, in this multipolar world now, how are we going to judge, Kenya's foreign policy and the way we practice diplomacy? First, we are having groupings emerging in the south. How are we participating? We are having the BRICS.
Yes.
Why don't we have the BRICS spelled correctly with Kenya there as a K? I mean, we need that's what we should do. The BRICS is badly spelled out. Convince the Russians and the
Ethiopians wants to join the BRICS as well.
So he's actually agreeing with me.
No, I'm saying you need to position yourself there. In the Horn, we have positioned ourselves well. IGAD was, to all intents and purposes, dead. Ruto has revived it.
Yes.
So it is back.
Yeah.
And we have taken the leadership role in IGAD.
Yes.
So that's a plus. We are still on the margins of the G20. And we are a major African economy. In the African Union, we have now become a voice. So how do we navigate our way into this multipolar world? That's the most important. And there is no power that now calls the shot, the way they used to do in the Cold War and in the immediate post-Cold War decades. So in this regard, I think Kenya needs to stick to pragmatism, but we need to be very, very strong in our national interests.
Yes.
And those national interests need to be very, very clear. What is it that we want to become?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. So, the demos will not impair Kenya's image. This is what the foreign affairs minister was saying in an interview here with the Standard. And he says Alfred Muto dispels notions the foreign department has ceded its traditional role. He says what's being witnessed are changes they have embraced to eliminate bureaucracy. And we may want to grab a copy of that particular a piece of interview that we had here. But him saying the demos will not impair Kenya's image, and what the president was saying as well on the ground, there seems to be
Nonsense.
it's nonsense.
No pussy.
Your words. Let's hear from Dr. Hassan Kanenje. How will it not impair Kenya's image? And this is from the foreign minister.
Oh,
Hassan. I think.
Hassan.
What?
Speak.
Our CS is a very likable person.
He's a very likable
Can you
person.
shut up?
Okay.
He's a very likable person, but that is equivalent to saying the rains are not going to make me wet. No, they're going to make you wet. Try to get out there. It's raining and make you wet.
Yes.
You see, demos are part of civic practice. As a democracy, it is in our constitution, and therefore, they're allowed, and they should always be allowed. The trouble is, when those demos, of course, are going to involve ripping apart, expressways and stuff like that, that hurts your image. When those demos involve deaths and violence, that hurts your image. Now, perhaps he could not find the most diplomatic words of actually saying, well, it may not perhaps significantly damage our place and our standing, because as Kenya, we are used to some of this noise. Democracy can be noisy and sometimes can inspire certain passions and, a few things of this behavior.
So a bit of diplo speak.
Exactly, understand. But, the truth is it has. It has. To the extent that you turn on Al Jazeera, DW, BBC, where what they were showing is how Kenyans were killing each other. The violence and ripping things apart and stuff like that, that hurts the confidence that the world has in us. In fact, our greatest concern for some of us, stuff like that has a long-term impact on our ability as a country to grow and to attract investment, to the extent that even our own Kenyans are actually moving out of the country. Of course, it affects us. So that is not exactly true. However, there are so many other things that still make Kenya an exceptional country. and perhaps it may remain so in the years to come. But we have to guard it jealously if we want to preserve that kind of privilege.
Indeed.
I just want to add, if you just see reality, you just don't have vision. Most people who just look at reality, they don't have a vision about how things should transform. And I think that Mr. Mutua says what he believes the president likes to hear. So this is nonsense to say that the demos will not impair Kenya's image. The demos have muddied our image. We're on the front page of every newspaper in Europe. We're on Al Jazeera, police beating up people. I mean, there's sometimes that the one thing I've learned about communications, one of the things I've learned about it is when you're wrong and you've made a mistake, own it. Stand up, say this was a mistake, we're going to change it, we made a mistake and we're going to move forward from it. And that way, you inspire public confidence. But when you say demos will not impair Kenya's image, it's like, telling Kenyans to reread 1984. And maybe, that's the Ministry of Truth now. It's not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I think that the people at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Debal, are not a good fit because the president doesn't want anybody big in any of the ministries who is going to come out and look better than his own office. And I think this is not a way to work. We want to have men and women who have panache, who have independence, who can run the foreign ministry, who can say things in a way that can be supported by the president. And in that way, the government can run. You can tell, Debal, that the government today has no confidence. 75% of the people who are asked, what do you think about the government? They said they're going in the wrong direction. It's not me. It's the closest poll we did.
Right.
And if you really want to get even a better poll, is to do it in the constituencies in which the president was elected. And I think they've gotten off the bus.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Professor, don't you think also when it comes to bureaucracy, I think that's where now the foreign ministry should be predicated on. It should be steeped in bureaucracy. I think that's the element of a good diplomacy. I don't know, but you can educate me. Not really the dead hand of bureaucracy, but protocol.
No, diplomacy is about marketing a country. It is the equivalent of what you can call advertising firms. Wherever you brand your country and you market it aggressively. So
no, but I'm coming from the point where he's saying he's trying to change the system so that we kill away the bureaucracy. And we've seen the faux pas that has really come from the foreign affairs lately. That's what I'm really talking about. I'm not talking about diplomacy.
The question we are having here is demos will not impair Kenya's foreign policy. This is it.
Yes, and it goes to say Mutua dispels notion the foreign department has ceded its traditional role, says what's being witnessed are changes they have embraced to eliminate bureaucracy.
There is something Chinua Achebe told us that you can choose either to put the fire, burning your heart, or to chase the rat escaping the flames. It's your choice. It's your choice. Look at it this way. The dominant image of Kenya between March 2023 and now, as we talk, 26th of July, is that of an anchor state in the Horn of Africa, hurtling down to anarchy and chaos.
Correct.
That's the dominant image. It may be exaggerated, it might be incorrect,
but nonetheless,
but that's what is being consumed in the media. That's what Al Jazeera is putting through there. That's what CNN is putting out there. That's one good example. A friend of mine have just sent me something just now, possibly why President Ruto is in Tanzania. The heads of state human capital summit was supposed to be held in Nairobi. Because of the feeling that Nairobi is not secure, it was moved to Tanzania. Now look at the money that our hotels have lost. Yes, and you see the demos are not going to impact on our foreign policy. Already Tanzania is beginning to leap big in terms of the destination of peaceful meetings. Look at the other thing, advisory. Travel advisories. Now, travel advisories are normally seen as adversarial or basically hurting the country. The essence is that the moment you are rated as insecure, insurance companies withdraw their cover for those who want to travel to Kenya. Meaning you are not going to get tourists at this period when it is a peak season. because of those advisories. And why the advisories? Because people are plucking railways or other destroying highways, and that the country is on a permanent lockdown. And finally, the same case with business. Business are relocating, not only foreign businesses, our own businesses are moving.
Interesting editorial cartoon that you have also there.
Yes.
As you can see, some of the businesses, Kenya is open for business there. William Ruto in his house or in his kiosk, open for business, but it's burning the tires. But people are running for option for business on the other side of Tanzania.
Yes. So it is not true that Kenya is not hurting from these demos. And that's why you're saying it's not about power sharing. It's about building our nation and creating the right image. And creating the right image means that Kenya is a country that talks. It's not a country that threatens. Because what we are getting from both sides of the aisle are threats. We will not talk them. We are going to send Raila back to Bondo. Where do you get Raila back to Bondo? He's already here. So those kind of militancy and the idea of chasing the rat, escaping your frames, rather than basically addressing the right issues. Those are the challenges.
Dr. Moses, we wind up with you. We need to take a short break.
Yes, I think I'll partially agree with Dr. Mtua that demons do not hurt our image.
You agree?
Partially.
Agree, or he says it does not hurt.
Explain so we can.
It does not. I'm going to explain why I partially agree with his statement. One, Kenya has so many agents of diplomacy, our athletes, and who have a very good name out there. Now, the only thing that hurts the economy, that will interfere with the economy, is the extrajudicial killing by the police, the immorality of government officials in terms of corruption. So when he says that demons will not hurt our economy, yes, maybe it will not. But what will hurt the economy is the actions.
Hurt our image.
The image of our economy.
We're talking about image.
The image of our country. What will hurt the image of our...
Can we disagree?
Yes. What will hurt our image is the extrajudicial killing, the actions of the state against the demonstrators, because demonstration is expression of freedom of speech. But now how you deal with it is what will hurt the image of the state.
All right.
Just a little point. Winston Churchill said, diplomacy is about telling someone to go to hell and asking him to find his own directions there. Mr. Onyango is telling us that Mr. Mutua should go to hell, but he should find his own way there. The image of the country is battered. Just because faith has kept hope alive in the distance running doesn't mean that we're off the main networks in the world. Any first page or editorial Dabal has got Kenya with the soldiers hitting people.
All right.
So this is, I beg to disagree.
Just a quick one on this.
We're due for a break.
All the foreign media, from Al Jazeera to Guardian,
number one.
the headlines, their headlines are protests in Kenya.
Yeah.
That's it.
So there are images.
So is that not Kenya trading or Kenya rising
or Kenya
doing this a good election in Kenya? It is about protests, killings, and all that.
The young man is being nice.
So and it seems Kenya still is at the crosshairs in Sudan's, of course, warring factions as it is right now, with General saying that Kenya should desist, also deploying their forces or peacekeeping forces in Sudan. We shall hear from that as well. It's been 100 days since this war erupted in Sudan, and it seems not to be getting any clearer. If any happy medium will be, of course, reached as far as this is concerned. We take a short break right now. Ashi.